Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at Zamperini Field for the 2017 Palos Verdes Concours d'Elegance. The event features classic automobiles and vintage aircraft. Let's go enjoy the event. I'm here with Ray Johnson, the chairman of the Palos Verdes Concours d'Elegance. Can you tell us about the event today?
Absolutely. Welcome to the Concours. We're really excited about being here at Zamperini Field at Robinson Helicopter. Our theme is elegance and speed. We're featuring Packards and Porsches and, of course, a wide range. We've got 19 classes, a wide variety of classes. All the classes, I think, really look excellent. And, of course, the airplanes. We've got about 14 airplanes. The nice thing is we're showing the planes and the cars together. So you're seeing by era for the most part, 1930s cars or with a 1930s airplane. And I think people have been really enjoyed that. We've had perfect weather here, and it seems to be going very well. I think we're going to have some surprises during the award ceremony too, so it's shaping up to be an excellent concours.
How many people do you expect to attend this event today?
Well, we're hoping to get about 3,000. I'm not sure if we made it. It's a big venue, so it's hard to tell with everybody spread out, but it seems to me like it's been very successful. We've got a good crowd of people here, and hopefully we're going to be at around that 3,000 mark.
And who benefits from this?
Our benefactors are the Boys and Girls Club of LA Harbor and also the Western Museum of Flight right here at the Torrance Airport. So the Boys and Girls Club, of course, is an excellent organization. A lot of kids have been sent to college because of their support. And then the Western Museum of Flight does a great job of educating people in aviation. So we hope to support both of those organizations. And also, there's a lot of people we need to thank for this. The Kurt Robinson and all the people at Robinson Helicopter made this facility available to us, which provides fantastic infrastructure, great parking for our spectators, great parking for the trucks and trailers and everything that we have to do. And then the airport and the Airport Commission has been wonderful to work with. They've done a great job, been very supportive. And then the City of Torrance. The Mayor's Office and the City Council have all been very supportive, very can-do, and have helped us in many ways in putting this thing on and making it a success.
Well, thank you, Ray.
Thank you very much.
I'm here with Kurt Robinson, the president and CEO of Robinson Helicopter. I understood that you've been going by, when you were younger, a different title.
Yeah, for many years before my father retired, I think I was hopefully affectionately known as the SOB, the son of boss, was a lot of people referred to me as we were getting the company going.
Well, it's an amazing company, and to have the Concours here this year, thank you for doing that. It's an awesome location.
We are so pleased to be able to provide the venue for it. I think it helps tie together the South Bay. I think it allows everybody to see how important our airport is, and having the groups together is just wonderful. You got young and old and everything in between, and we're really excited about today.
And you have a car here, a family car. Can you talk a little bit about it?
I can, actually. My father, obviously, is a mechanical engineer, so he has a love of cars, and when he was young, he used to work on cars. But the car he lusted after most as a young man was the 39 Packard, which was the car in the day. And if you were anybody, you had a 39 Packard. A few years ago, he happened to see one at the Concours d'Elegance up at Trump, and my younger sister said, "Dad, you got to buy it. You just got to get it." So he kept talking to the owner, and a few weeks later, Frank pulled into the driveway with the 39 Packard. It's a beautiful car, and we're really, really pleased to have it here.
Well, let's walk over there and have a look at it.
We are now standing in front of the 39 Packard, which, as you can see, is a beautiful car. It's a 12-cylinder, has a 6-volt battery, and it holds actually quite a few people. One of the interesting things is after my father bought it, he needed a reason to drive it. We have our quarterly board meetings, and we had them for several years. We would always go over to the Marie Callender's on Hawthorne, if you know where that is, and we'd have the meeting in the back. Well, Frank insisted for several years that everybody pile into the 39 Packard, and we would drive over to the Marie Callender's to have our board meetings. And it was quite fun. You know, all the people that watch us ride in it, and then my father at the steering wheel. He couldn't have been more proud. So we are absolutely pleased to have it here, along with all the other beautiful cars here. I am just absolutely amazed at what people are going to see here. So thank you again for allowing us to bring the car.
I'm here with Bob Potts. And what did you bring to the Concours?
We brought a 1911 Lozier, belongs to Stan Lucas.
And how did he happen to buy this car?
Oh, earlier this year, one became available and it was bought at an auction. He's desired a Lozier for the longest time. It's one of the great antique cars, and Stan has a great antique car collection, so it kind of filled it out for him. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about his collection?
Well, he's been collecting cars for quite some time. He's based down in Long Beach, and just a great sampling of the greatest antique cars that have ever been, both American and European. So he has things like a Olds Limited, only 6 of those in the world, the only 6-cylinder Stutz Bearcat, Mercer Raceabout, Thomas Flyer, Simplex, on and on, European cars, a Speed 6 Bentley, 8-liter Bentley, a 35B Bugatti race car, some of the greatest of all time. So, yeah.
Wow, what a collection.
Yeah, he's been at it a long time, so he's really passionate about it. Yeah.
Can we have a closer-up look at this car?
Sure. Basically, you have your throttle and your spark advance on the steering wheel. It's a 4-speed transmission with a reverse. It has a very interesting air-powered starter. These big cars are hard to crank over, so to aid that, there's an onboard compressor which allows the engine to be turned over with compressed air. You have a fuel system that's also powered by compressed air. In other words, the gas tank is pressured, and then the fuel runs up to the front of the car to the carburetor. So overall, it's a straight cut gears in the transmission. It takes a while to get the hang of that, but shifting is not that difficult once you get the hang of it. And it drives very stably, and it's a great old car. And in the original sales brochure, it said once you attain 70 miles per hour, then you could be allowed to shift into 4th gear, which is an amazing statistic for a car from 1911. So this is a very fast, powerful car. So Lozier Motor Car Company started off by producing racing cars, and they produced them for races like the Indianapolis 500 and things like that. They almost won the race, and because of that, they decided to build passenger cars for the public that would appreciate a very powerful, very high-performing car based off their wins on the track. There's some features here I'd like to show you with the car. On the floor here, and you operate this with the heel of your shoe, is you hit the button there. That's the starter, which engages an air starter, which powers the cylinders and helps the car start versus getting in the front of the car and cranking it, which is always a dangerous thing to do on such a big car. Next to it are 2 buttons that actually engage a compressor on the car that pump up an air tank that is the reservoir for the air starter. Something else I'd like to point out here is you have your clutch pedal, you have a center accelerator pedal, and then you have on the far right your brake pedal. Also, in back of the accelerator pedal, you'll notice this little gizmo here that holds your heel in place so that when you're hitting the accelerator, your foot has a better angle on the accelerator. Something else I'd like to point out here. Here you have a clock. This is a air pump for the gas pressure. So as you pump this, it pressurizes the tank. Usually it takes about 1 to 2 pounds of pressure, which the gauge shows here. This is the gauge for the air starter, and usually it can start on about 150 pounds. Right now you'll notice it's about 160, so we're ready to go again. Next to it is the speedometer, and then this shows your battery charge, and then the various switches for the lights and things like that. And then on the steering column is the main switch, your ignition switch. So you turn that up to the second position, it turns on the mag and the battery, and then you hit the button down there with your heel, and it starts the engine up for you. So it starts very easily, actually. Well, this is the exciting part about a Lozier car. These engines were originally developed for their race cars, and they won a lot of races in the early 100s and then the teens. They almost won the Indy 500. So anyway, it's a 6-cylinder, ball bearing crank engine. It's around 450 cubic inch engine. Probably produces around 80-90 horsepower. Very sturdy engine. You can really get them going fast without them, falling apart, made of the best materials. These little priming cups are, sometimes the old cars need a little bit of prime, so you would put raw gas, you turn this up, you'd put gas in the priming cup, close it, and then now you have gasoline already in the cylinders instead of trying to get up through the intake manifold. So a great way that the old cars, if you're out on the road someplace, a lot easier to start up. The valves are up here in the head, but that's what drives them with a camshaft down below. So here's basically your tappet, and those are the springs, intake and exhaust. Then also, as I alluded to before, this car had an air start system, because these big cars are very hard to crank over, and especially if they're not starting easily, you'll wear your arm out or you might even break it. So what they did is, very ingeniously, each cylinder has air going to it, and it's timed off of the distributor, so you can hit the button on the floor like I already talked about, and it shoots a bunch of air in each cylinder as in their correct firing order, which causes the engine to run off compressed air until it starts with the gasoline. So in other words, another way to start a very big engine like this. You can do it with a crank in front, but it's a very big engine and often very hard to turn over by hand, and also a little dangerous if it would kick back on you. They are very expensive cars. This is a 1911 car, cost $7,000 new, which is a huge amount of money back then, but it outperformed anything in the day. They made very few of these cars. There's only 2 of these that exist today. A lot of fun to drive, really. So anyway, here are some very interesting things about the outside of this car. Number one, it's got these 2 big headlights on it that are acetylene gas. They're not electric, so when they're going down the road, they're fueled with an acetylene tank. You notice the crank here. This is how we'd turn the engine over if you needed to. Very well built, very heavy chassis. It has friction shocks. Again, here's the crank for the engine if you need to do it, although it does have the air starter on it. You have the acetylene lamps here that they're not electric, they run off of gas, acetylene gas, so you have to light them, which is always kind of precarious. Right here is where the speedometer is run off of the front wheel. You'll notice there's no brakes, it's just rear wheel brakes, so you really have to plan your stops. The speedometer is here. Here's the gear that runs the speedometer, which goes up to the passenger compartment. So you can see the speedometer inside, and here's the gearing on the wheel, turns this gear, which then calculates how many miles per hour you're running. The wheels and tires on these old cars are often this dismountable type of rim, where when you change the tire, you basically unbolt these nuts here, take the wheel with this metal rim on, and the 2 spares are on the side of the driver there, and then you come up to the car and you bolt them back on. So that's how you would change a flat tire when you're on the road. The car has 2 spare tires, because often when you're riding on the road, you'll get more than 1 flat, so you'll need 2 of them. Again, here are this dismountable rim, so the tire and the rim are already mounted up with air in them, and then you'd come over to the wheel and you would unbolt these nuts here, slip the rim and the tire off and put the new one back on, and then put the flat spare right back up here. You have cowl lights, they're called. These are also acetylene powered with gas. And then here is a little bulb horn, and I can honk this for you. Anyway, kind of works. Often old cars did not have windshields, which made going down the road kind of, you needed, goggles and all this stuff. This one does have one, but the neat part is, if you want to really feel the air and everything, you can fold this one down and get the air in your face, and it's really cool when you're going down a country road. This is called a 7-passenger touring car. So notice right now the top is down, folded back, but often it's up. And the reason why 7 passengers, you have your driver and your co-driver, then you have these 2 little seats here. Usually the kids would ride in these things, and then you have 3 adults at the back. So you add that up, it's 7 passenger, and a very grand, heavy car that could take the old roads really well. A lot of fun to drive, really. Just like in the front of the car, it had acetylene lights. There's 1 tail light on the back here, and it is also run on acetylene gas, just to warn people in back. Later, for car tours, they insist that you have electric lights. That's what these are here. There's a 6-volt battery inside that runs those, but the real tail light on it would have been this one right here. So here's the back of the Lozier touring car. You'll notice that the top is folded down and in canvas to protect it. The gas tank is right under here, and it's about 15 to 18 gallon gas tank. And then also when you tighten up the cap, then there's a compressor inside that fills the remaining gas tank with air, and it pressurizes the gas, which then pushes it up to the carburetor. So it was a technique used in those days. A lot of people think it's dangerous because you're compressing gasoline with air, and some people think it could be explosive, but that's the way they used to do it. You dare not want to puncture that as you're driving. And then most often old cars of this vintage had a little trunk on the back because there was no room inside to really put a lot of things. So let's say you're going out for the picnic or something like that, you'd put things inside, and under this canvas here is a little stowaway box that you can put things in.
I'm here with Darren Moore and his P-51. This is an awesome plane. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Where do I start? World War II, it came into existence around 1943. This plane actually went to Europe in 44 for all of 2 months. And it was at the very end of the war, so probably didn't see any action. It came back, went back into the Air Force, National Guard, and then it went to civilian registry in 1958. And it was owned by 2 or 3 men for a couple of years, and then a man bought it and parked it out on the San Jose flight line for 35 years. It sat outside. So he eventually passed away. The wife sold it. It went to Florida for a 6-year restoration, and I bought it right when it came out of restoration.
What's it like to fly?
There's no other feeling like it. It fits you like a glove. It does whatever you want it to do. You just have to pay attention on what you're doing. Everyone asks me what it's like to fly. It flies like a regular airplane, but when things go wrong, they go wrong real fast, so you really have to be on the ball.
Can we have a closer up look?
Help yourself. Okay, you asked me about my favorite parts of the airplane. I can start with the least favorite, and that has to do with the skin of the plane. It's all aluminum. This is not chrome. It takes about 2 days to polish it, and it takes about 15 minutes to get it dirty. So polishing is an extremely difficult portion of this plane, of owning this plane. Favorite part of the plane? It's probably the noise. Everyone loves the noise of the Mustang because it has a very unique sound to it. Unfortunately, I don't get to hear that noise. Inside the plane is nothing but loud, rackety noise. But outside it has just the most beautiful noise. So the other thing I don't care for is obviously the gas consumption. It is about 200 gallons an hour on takeoff, but up in flight's about 65 gallons in cruise. But it is what it is.
Darren, you have another plane here.
I do.
And can you talk about the Ryan?
Sure. This is a 1937 Ryan STA. I just literally came out of restoration yesterday. Flying it over the Santa Monica Mountains to Torrance from Santa Paula, I had an engine problem, and I almost had to make an emergency landing at LAX. I have since fixed it, but I'm thankful I got it here for the show because a lot of people were asking about it. But unfortunately, I got another polished airplane, so here we go, more polishing.
How'd you acquire this airplane?
Barnstormers is ad in one of the local internet places that sell airplanes, and a man owned it in Italy, and I acquired it as a project, and it took about 3 years to restore.
It is absolutely really something. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
It is a fun airplane to fly. It is an old plane, 1937, so there's a lot of old stuff we really have to pay attention to, but it's a fun plane to fly.
Well, thank you for bringing it to the Concours.
My pleasure.
I'm here with Darren Moore and his 1932 Packard. Can you tell us a little bit about the car?
Yeah, I acquired this in a Mecum auction in Amelia Island a couple of years ago. It belonged to a man that owned it up in Montecito, California. And it was an older man. He never drove it. And so when I bought it at the auction, I bought it sight unseen. And when I got it back home, I found out that the engine had some corrosion inside. So I had it torn down, so it has a brand new rebuilt motor. But this particular Packard belonged to Clark Gable. That's its claim to fame. And this is a very rare 905 Roadster, and there's only really one in existence that I know of that's a true Roadster. And it's a V12, and I'll show you that engine later.
Can we have a quick walk around?
Sure. Okay, this is a V12 Packard. Very, very reliable motor. It's actually the same manufacturer for my P51. Same design, not the same motor obviously, but the same design. It was just rebuilt and it's running like a top right now.
I'm here with Darren Moore and his 1922 Stutz. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. This is a Stutz Bearcat, which is a factory race car. And what happens is people would buy these and basically just take the fenders off and take them right to the racetrack. The difference between a Stutz Bearcat versus a Stutz Roadster is, if you notice over here, this is a right-hand drive. That means steering wheel obviously in the right hand, but the stick shift and the brake are on the outside of the car, where a Roadster is on the inside, which makes it a wider body.
Can we have a quick walk around?
Sure. This is the motor. It's an inline 4. It's a large motor, 360 cubic engine. And it gets up and goes. It cruises about 60, and it can go about 80 miles an hour top speed. The claim to fame to the Stutz Bearcat was, according to legend, Henry Stutz built the car, and before even testing it, he took it right to Indianapolis, and it took 11th place without any test driving whatsoever.
I'm here with Cindy and Bill Harris. It's good to see you folks again.
Nice to see you too.
Good to see you.
And what did you bring today?
Brought our 1915 Model T touring car.
And can you talk a little bit about why you enjoy the older cars, the vintage cars?
Well, I grew up with the old cars, and as a kid had a passion from day one. Cindy did as well. She's always liked the old cars. And now we're finding that these shows or events, Concours, are the only place that you can really get the attention by some of the younger people. So we like to bring it out to show off the car. We do drive the car quite a bit, but we also like to show it off to others.
And Cindy, you're enjoying this too.
Oh, absolutely. And it's unfortunate there are fewer and fewer people that like the old cars because, they're not exactly speedy, but there's a lot of character to them, a lot of fun, and people always enjoy seeing them. So we like to inspire people to get involved as well with the hobby.
Can you tell us a little bit about one of your adventures you've taken in this car?
Well, today was one example. We live in Huntington Beach, and they're having air shows this weekend over there. And we had a choice of either trailering the car over here to the Torrance Airport or driving. And we decided, let's drive it. And it took us under 2 hours. We stayed on Pacific Coast Highway the whole way, no problems. And, why trailer it? The car was meant to be driven, so that's what we did today.
We've done some longer tours. On a tour up to Carpinteria, we did trailer up there, but from there we drove up to Shaver Lake, which was kind of an adventure, and quite a few tours around that area. Beautiful, up in that beautiful part of scenic California.
Well, it's good to see you folks again.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
I'm here with Tom Lee, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
Well, today we bought a 1923 Will St. Clair Roadster. It's a rather rare car. There's only about 50 of them left out of 12,000. This particular one is really unusual because it's an overhead cam V8, and it was the first production overhead cam V8. There were 4 cylinders and 6 cylinders, but not a V8. So Wills was the head guy at Ford from 1903 to 1919, and then he and Ford got into a fight, and one thing led to another, and he quit. He took his $12 million and went off and built his own car, and this is what he built. And unfortunately, in 1923, this car was $3,250, and a Model T Ford was only $295. So it was for the rich kids, and it wasn't a big car, but it was an unusual car. It was actually it was a muscle car of the era. When you talk about Camaros and Mustangs, this was the 1920s version. So.
Well, how'd you happen on this car?
I found it in a river wash in Modesto. I bought the car back in 1970, I think it was 77, and I spent years chasing down all the parts that were missing and so forth and so on, and then I finally finished it at the end of 2000, year 2000. We took it to Pebble Beach in 2001 and won the vintage class there with it. So it's a neat car. It's a fun car.
Can we have a walk around?
Sure. What we have here is the engine, and you'll notice the cam tower. Again, it's a V8. So what we have is 14 spur gears that drive down to the crankshaft that drive the cams on each side, camshaft being here, and the valves are actuated with rocker arms, and the technology that they use then is almost identical to most modern overhead cam engines that you'd buy, whether it's a Honda or Toyota or Ford or whatever. Some other unusual things about it. One of the technologies that they came up with in 1923, it's the first engine to have a declutching fan, which means that as the RPM goes up, the fan slows down, doesn't take horsepower. And they didn't come up with that until 1955-56 on the GM engines. Okay, if you notice on the distributor, you notice the firing order. It has all the cylinders numbered, and then the lines going back and forth, so, it's 1, 5, 4, etc. If you've got the changing spark plugs and you forget what you're doing, all you got to do is look at the top, and there it is for you. The engine itself, there's so many different unique things. Another thing is down in here is the starter motor. The starter motor is actually a generator as well as a starter. It's all in one unit. And that's something that just happened when you're the new cars where they turn off at the traffic light to save gas and so forth. That is a single unit rather than having two. And of course they did that in 1923. Another thing, this is a vacuum tank, and instead of a fuel pump, this is a line of vacuum off the intake manifold. It creates a vacuum in this tank, and what that does is suck the fuel out of the gas tank. So it has no fuel pump. It's all, it's not mechanical at all. It just uses the difference between air pressures, and the fuel is siphoned out of the tank, goes into that chamber, and then it's gravity feed into the carburetor, which is down under here. Another unusual thing about the engine is that the water system is thermal siphon. So you notice the large diameter pipe here, and then down here you have a small diameter pipe. And what happens is the water enters in the bottom of the engine where it's the coolest, rises up to the top as it picks up temperature, and then as the expansion of it, it goes into the tank, back down through the radiator, and does the whole cycle like that. And so it doesn't have a water pump, and you don't have to worry about a water pump leaking or wearing out on you because there isn't one. It's all self-contained, and it operates just out of basically thermodynamics. So it's really a very, very advanced as far as a power plant is concerned in 1923. Also keep in mind that when this engine was made, when this car was made, you didn't have computers, and you didn't have, all the computer assist engineering and so forth. You didn't have the drafting. You didn't have CNC machines. What you had is people sitting at a drawing board with paper and pencil or pen, and they drew everything. I mean, everything was hand drawn, and then it went down into the machine shop where every piece was manually made. And that in itself, when you look at the complexity of the engine, that in itself was really quite astounding for 1923. As far as the body of the car and the outer lines of it, you'll notice the first thing is the Canadian goose is the hood ornament. And the reason for that is that the car was built in Marysville, Michigan. Marysville is about 75 miles north of Detroit. And it has all the, the little ponds and things. So the Canadian geese on their way south, or conversely on their way north, would stop there and feed because they had water, they had plenty of foliage that they could tank up fuel to fly the next 4,000 miles wherever they were going. The farm itself, Wills, again, was the head guy at Ford from 1903 to 1919, and this was the farm where Ford and Harvey Firestone and Thomas Edison and John Burroughs and all of them went on their hunting trips. There's lots of pictures and lots of dialogue about that where you see them in their suits and ties, and they have their shotguns, and you see all the geese that they shot. Well, when Wills and Ford split up, that was not friendly, so he went and literally bought the farm where they went hunting and built his factory and built a town, which is Marysville, where the car was made. The headlights are unique because in here there are two reflectors. In those days you didn't have twin element bulbs for high and low beam. And so what they did is they took, and there's a magnetic solenoid in here, and with the second reflector, what happens is on the steering column you have a switch, and you turn it in one direction and it rotates the reflector. So for high and low beam, you have a single element bulb, but the reflector is rotated, which puts the beam further or shorter down the road. Kind of a unique thing. Nobody had that in those days. That was something that Wills came up with. As far as the body is concerned, Wills was a metallurgist, and one of the things that he designed was steel that could be formed in the compound curves. And so when you look at the body, this is one of the first all-steel bodies. He and the Dodge brothers and a company by the name of Budd Manufacturing, which is still in business today, they make railroad cars and 18-wheeler trailers and things like that. And they had all the patents on steel body construction, punch presses, spot welding, and the technology for the building of an all-steel body. And this is an all-steel body. Typically in the 20s and teens and so forth, your bodies were a wood frame that was skinned or upholstered with metal. And in this case, it is all steel, all the bracing, everything in it is steel. The only wood in the body is the actual floorboards. Another unique feature of the car are the wheels. In the early 1900s and teens and so forth, you notice that most old cars had wood wheels. And the problem with that was if you got into a hard corner or if there was a little rod or cracking or whatever, you'd hit it, and as the car turned, the hub would want to go right out through the wheel, and of course the wheel would collapse. Well, because Wills was a metallurgist and they had punch presses and all that as far as, you know, their technology, they designed a wheel which is basically similar to a bell washer, so that when you hit a corner, you notice how the wheel dishes in. When you hit a corner, the wheel wanted to get larger in diameter, and of course the rim on the outside would control it. So the stability of the wheels, it just solved that problem immediately. As far as the interior is concerned, it's pretty standard. It has the typical gauges of amp gauge, oil pressure gauge, speedometer, odometer, and of course you have the various switches. One of the unique things that I get asked a lot about is what are all these levers on the steering column? This lever is the throttle. You have a foot throttle, but you also have, this is the early cruise control. You just set the throttle, and of course, off you go. Now the problem with that is, if you want to slow down, you have to manually move it back. The other thing, this is the spark advance. Before the advent of vacuum spark advance or electronics, you had to manually control your spark control. I talked earlier about the headlights. This is the switch for high and low beam. By turning this, that activates the switch, which in turn rotates the reflector I mentioned. Of course, this is the horn button. Typical pedals, left is clutch, center is brake, the right button is the throttle, the accelerator, and then you have a button that's over in front of the gear shift, and that's the starter. You push that down and that engages the starter. On the shift column, there's a lock. So part of the lock, besides the ignition lock, you have a lock on the transmission, so that, and that's the same key as the ignition. So if you go to, park your car, you can lock it out of gear so that nobody can steal the car on you. Okay, the back end of the car. You'll notice you get a better look at the spare tire. This is a lock that locks it on so nobody can steal it. Really, the most unique part about it is that this is the very first car that had a backup light. And you notice this light is a backup light. This is your regular tail light. Now, the interesting part about it is it's got a backup light, but it has no stop light. I guess they didn't worry about traffic in those days. They worried about backing into a tree. But as far as stopping and somebody running into you, I guess that wasn't an issue. The rest of the car, you can notice the body lines, the compound curves and so forth, which in most cases, cars of that era, they had to make those compound curves out of several pieces and then weld them together. This is basically one piece. And then you have the rumble seat, which is the handle, and it folds up. And off you go. So that's it.
I'm here with Dick Smith, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
I brought a 29 Travel Air and a 29 Model A that I've had forever. And I also bought a Roadster that's at the other end of the field here.
All right, and how did you happen on these?
I've had the Travel Air since 1980, and I've had the Model A since 58. And I've had the 32 probably 12 years.
The Roadster.
The Roadster.
You have a lot of fun in that Roadster.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, Dick. So good to see you. We'll see you again at Coffee and Cars.
Thank you.
I'm here with Donna and Bob Richardson. What did you bring to the Concours today?
Well, this is a 1942 Staggerwing Beechcraft. It was the original, kind of the Learjet of the 30s and 40s. This airplane was built for executives, and this, in fact, was built initially for the Navy as a GB-2, so it flew around all of the admirals.
How did you happen on this plane?
Well, my father and I purchased this plane about 45 years ago, and we brought it out here to California, and we flew it for about 15 years, and then we took it all apart and completely rebuilt it from the ground up.
Oh, it's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I mean, you've had it for 45 years. I'm sure you've had some wonderful experiences in it.
Well, it was a tremendous experience for my father and I. My father loved airplanes. He was a PhD engineer. In fact, he was the designer of all of the modern hybrid cars that you see on the road. He actually invented the hybrid car. So he had a tremendous amount of experience, and we both did this all together as a family thing and flew it for years and years. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience for both of us.
Donna, are you enjoying the plane also?
Yes, I do.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm here with Larry Crane, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
I came with a Wheaton C27 Aerosport Coupe from the Mullen Automotive Museum in Oxnard.
Is there a history you'd like to share with us about the car?
The Wheaton brothers were the first aircraft manufacturers in the world. They had an aircraft factory in Paris in 1905. During World War I, they made 3,000 fighter planes in their factory, and they licensed 8,000 more. So there were over 10,000 Wheaton aircraft for World War I. And in Gabriel's book, he said on November 11th, 1918, he was the world's largest aircraft manufacturer. Oh, wow. On November 12th, he was the smallest car maker because the war ended and the airplane stopped and all that. It's a Knight, which is an American company, a Knight sleeve valve patented engine that was done because it's silent. Because what he wanted to make was a luxury car. Mm-hmm. And in luxury to him was you had to introduce this ability to make a silent engine. And Knight did the best one. So all of his cars have Knight patent sleeve valve engines. They're incredibly complicated. And there's so many surfaces inside this, with two sleeves going up and down and a piston inside the sleeves. Wow. To keep all those surfaces lubricated, there's oil everywhere. So if it isn't smoking, it isn't running, sort of a thing. But they're fabulous cars. And every piece of the car is an art piece.
Could we have a closer up look?
Yes, please. The Mullen Automotive Museum is an art museum, basically, with cars. It's an Art Deco era museum from 1930 to 1940, primarily. And Peter collects only French cars and only French coach-built cars. In other words, handmade cars. Most of the cars in the museum, there's only one or two or three. One was made for the Shah of Iran, which Peter owns, and this is the only closed car, and he owns them both. And this interior is probably the iconic interior for an Art Deco museum. The pattern was unique to this car, to this series of cars. All of these early cars are very complex devices, and it's all kind of mechanical things being done by cables, and there's no electronics. Electric only fires the spark plugs. This is the C27. It's a 6-cylinder sleeve valve engine, very high performance for its day. It's a very complex engine. There are two separate crankshafts. There's a large crankshaft that operates the normal pistons, and a small crankshaft operates only the sleeve valves. But there are no hard valves in a typical way, which are noisy to operate. So the sleeve valve was done specifically because they run quietly.
I'm here with Eric Nielsen and this Waco. Can you tell us a little about the Waco?
Well, it's a 1941 Waco biplane, and it was used in the CPT program, which was a civilian pilot training program that the government was endorsing back in the 40s. They built 600 of them. They were scattered all over the country, and it was basically to enhance general aviation. This airplane was in Scranton, Pennsylvania when it was new, 1941, and flew there for a while. And it changed hands and wound up in a basket case sitting in upstate New York in 1954, and that's where it sat till I got it about 20 years ago. And then I restored it, and here it is.
How did you happen to buy this plane, a Waco and a biplane?
Well, I used to give rides in these back in the 80s. I used to do a barnstorming in them.
Okay.
And I kind of fell in love with the airplane then, so I used to fly one that looked exactly like this one. I restored this airplane to look like that one. It was out of this airport. And a guy named Greg Vucevic, we used to give rides and stuff like that. So I restored this airplane to look like that one, and that's where I fell in love with the airplane. And back when I was buying this one, they were pretty expensive for the day, and I had to spend $24,000 on this wreck. So I started with a basket case, figuring I can build it the way I want it.
It looks pretty awesome.
This is it. That's a finished product.
Can we have a quick walk around?
Sure.
Tell us about some of the features.
96-inch Curtiss Reader, meaning 8 feet long. This is an original. This was made in the 30s. This is a original motor that was rebuilt. It's a 220 Continental, 670 cubic inches. This airplane you can fly from both seats. If you're solo, you have to sit in the back for center of gravity purposes. There's a bench seat in the front, so I could put 2 people up there, side by side. Well, the structure itself is chromoly fuselage, and then it's covered with wood to give it its shape, and then fabric over that, and then that gets painted. So half of it's metal. This is metal here. This is fabric. This is fabric, and the wings are wood ribs, wood spars. And then you got metal struts, metal stainless steel flying wires.
I'm here with Guy Newmark. And what did you bring to the PV Concours today?
I brought a 1964 356C coupe that has 1 million miles on it.
Wow.
Actually, it's 1,005,000 miles now.
How'd you happen to buy this car?
My father bought it new. And when I graduated from college in 1968, he gave it to me as a graduation present, and I've been driving it as my everyday car ever since. That's why it has 1 million miles on it, because I'm in the boat business, and one day I'll show a boat in Santa Barbara, the next day I'll show a boat in San Diego, and I'm driving all the time. But the real reason is they didn't have fax machines. And if you wanted to get a signature, you drove for it. And so I ended up over these last 50 years putting 1 million miles on the car.
Oh, and it was your dad's car. That is so awesome.
That's right. And he took great care of it, but the only time the car's been in an accident was his fault. He drove into the side of a police car. But other than that, the car's had no blemishes.
Awesome. Can we have a quick walk around?
Sure, let's do that. Okay, so here we are with my car. I thought you spelled blue in German, B-L-U. So that's what I call the car, blue. It's misspelling the German spelling of it, but it's all right with me. Everybody knows the car is blue. And the car's become fairly famous because of the 1 million mile car. And I was filmed maybe 3 years ago, and I had to leave my garage door open, and sure enough, people saw the filming, came back 3 days later and took the car out of the garage, and the car was missing. Well, we found the car about 4 days after that, and they had cut all the wires under the dashboard, so I couldn't start it, but they couldn't hotwire it, so I got the car back. So I'm very happy about that, because after you've been driving a car for 50 years, to lose it was just brutal. So I'm happy to have it back, and this is blue. It's the last body style. It's a T6 body, and if you'll notice, there's not a flat spot on the car. It's an extremely clean car through the wind tunnel, and like most Porsches, the car is just a joy to drive. This one, you can see, has the flat hubcaps, and that's because they are disc brakes. They used to have drum brakes, but Porsche improved that in about 1963 and went to the discs. Well, here we are back with blue, and we're on blue's backside now where the engine is. The engine's not in front on these cars. It's in back like so many Porsches. And I'm very honored to have a badge on the back of the car that shows 1 million miles. And when I celebrated the car's 50th birthday, I pulled into the party and I stopped, and as I stopped, all the nines turned over to zeros. It was exactly 1 million miles.
I'm here with Mike Wilson, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
I brought a 1963B Porsche known as the Model 356.
And is there a story as to how you bought this car?
Well, this is actually the second car I've owned, the 356. I owned a 58 Coupe back in the day in the early to mid 70s, and that got sold as a part down payment on my first house.
Oh, wow.
So fast forward through family, and when my daughter finally graduated from college, I realized I had money again. So I went on the prowl and looked for another one, and I found this car locally. So.
And you've just done a restoration on it.
I just finished a 25-month restoration in March.
Oh, it's awesome. Can we have a walk around?
Absolutely, thank you. Well, when I first got the car, it was what you would consider a driver. The paint was tired, and it had some rust bubbles in it, but not having the budget to do a full restoration, I didn't want to go in just halfway with it. So I bided my time and built a budget until we went and started a bare metal restoration. So that meant all the paint came off, which you would typically do because you need to see the flaws that are underneath in the metalwork. In this case, it had some rust bubbles. It had some old patches that weren't any good. Then I kind of added some of my, period correct accessories, like I've got the chrome stone guards on the front headlights, and that was to protect, when you're driving, so rocks didn't break the glass on the headlights. The car's pretty nice. The paint's color is called slate gray. And it's a little bit darker than a true slate, but 3 years before I bought the car, it had been hit in the rear end. The previous owner had what I affectionately call a scratch and squirt paint job. So they just did the outside, but it was a little bit darker. So I liked the color, it grew on me, and I think it really sets off the chrome and the accents on the car, so I stayed with that color. The interior as well originally was red. The hubcaps on the car are what they call a super hubcap. There were two different types. There was a normal and a super. And the normal looks like what everybody knows is a baby moon hubcap. But getting a super hubcap was actually an option for the car. That kind of a little bit of trivia, and never backed up by anyone, is that the point of the Porsche crest points to the valve stem. It's more of like folklore than anything backed up by documentation. On the back, you've seen a lot of badges, sometimes on the grill work for the older Mercedes. On mine, I decided to kind of advertise the clubs that I belong to, one of which is the 356 Club of Southern California, and the other one is the 356 Registry. The other badge to the far left is 100 years, and that was the 100 years from Ferry Porsche. And the one on the other side is a badge that they actually gave customers after they clicked off 100,000 kilometers. So that's a reproduction badge, but very popular with people that have driven their cars, which they're meant to be.
I'm here with Chuck, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
Oh, I brought this little hot rod behind me.
Little hot rod?
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about it.
It's a 1930 Ford Model A two-door sedan. It's called Rodriguez. It's a world-famous car. It was actually built in a hot rod shop called Paradise Road in Nagoya, Japan, by Junichi Shimada. And with George Barris and Ed Roth as his idols, this was his creation.
How did you happen to buy this car?
Well, later this month, I'll have it 12 years. And 12 years ago, I was at a cruise place in Torrance called Ricky and Ronnie's. And he came cruising in there one night, and I happened to see it and started taking pictures of it. And my oldest son was talking to him, and about 15 minutes went by, and he said, "Hey, Dad, the guy's from Japan. He's been cruising this thing since January. He doesn't want to spend $5,000 to ship it back. It's for sale." That was music in my ears.
Wow, wow, what a find.
Yes. After looking at it 15 minutes, I made him a cash offer on it. 3 days later, I got a call from his friend saying that they had already left and they were willing to take my offer.
Oh, that's awesome, awesome. Can we have a quick walk around?
Sure, we can. It has some very unique features on it. The headlights, for example, are 59 Cadillac bumper ends. That's the turn signal and parking light. It has a 49 Olds 303 engine in it, which was perfect for the era that they were trying to create. This was back in the 60s. I love telling the younger people that when that engine first came out with the Oldsmobile, it was so popular with the hot rodders, they were stealing the cars just to pull the engines out. Everybody wanted an Olds rocket. The fenders are like no other. They're all hand-formed steel. He wanted the impression that they were floating, and I think he nailed it. The other thing is the wedge cut on the top of the car. It's stock height in the back and chopped 4 inches in the front. It's just a one-off car that has dramatically changed my life. The wheels are Kragers, and they're spoked wheels that are, to me, the only type of wire wheel that you'd want to have, because these things are so rigid, they never go out of balance or anything. It's just perfect for the car. The interior is very unique too. It's got a chopped down steering wheel that actually is functional. It makes it easier to get in and out of. He custom built 2 bucket seats that are like no other. And the interior is kind of a Tijuana style interior, cloth type interior with shag carpet in the back. The back is pretty unique too. The taillights are actually out of a 58 Chevy grill. That's the turn signaling parking light. And it has some unique striping on it, along with the bandino that's right in the center back there. And the name Rodriguez at the top, done in the Ed Roth type striping.
I'm here with Cindy Macha, the director of the Western Museum of Flight. It's really something to see the vintage aircraft here with the classic cars. And you were the one, well, your team actually is the one that brought them in. Can you talk a little bit about where they're from? And
Sure. A number of the museum came from our museum collection, like the YF-23 right behind us, the most unique of there's only 2 in the world. 2 came from commemorative Air Force units in Riverside and Cable Airport, and the rest were from the T hangars here at Zamperini Field.
Well, thank you for the effort.
Well, thank you for permitting us to participate. It's been great.
Thank you for joining us for the 2017 Palos Verdes Concours d'Elegance here at Zamperini Field. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.